Hello, my name is Brenda. I'm 63 years old, and I want to share a story that changed my life forever. After years together, I decided to reignite my marriage with a thoughtful surprise for my husband, Richard, a successful tycoon, while he went on a hunting trip with his friends. I baked his favorite cake, carefully packed it, and grabbed our loyal Maltese, Snowy, for the ride. Driving through the winding forest roads, I imagined the look on his face, the smile that would light up the cabin when he saw my gesture. But the moment I stepped inside that secluded cabin, Snowy erupted into furious barking, and I froze. What I saw next was a scene so shocking, so unimaginable, that it would haunt me forever. That day, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and my life shifted in a single moment. And this was only the beginning. What happened next would uncover secrets, lies, and a betrayal that went far deeper than I could ever have imagined. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now let's see how this story really began. I woke up before dawn, the faint light seeping through the curtains painting the kitchen in pale gold. Snowy, my faithful Maltese, lay curled on the rug, his tiny chest rising and falling with quiet rhythm. I could feel his warmth even through the early morning chill, and somehow that simple presence steadied me. Today, I was to pack a homemade cake for Richard, my husband of nearly 40 years. It had become a tradition, simple gestures for his hunting trips with friends, but there was a hollow knot tightening in my chest as I thought about the day ahead. I brushed Snowy's soft fur absently, whispering, "You'll come with me, won't you, boy?" He gave a soft whine in response, as if understanding more than I did. The forest road stretched ahead, twisting and turning like secrets hidden in the mist. I drove slowly, mindful of the way the early sun shimmered against the leaves, casting patterns on the windshield that danced like memories I could no longer fully trust. Snowy sat in the passenger seat, his tiny paws perched on the edge, eyes alert. His ears twitched at every crackle of the tires over gravel. I tried to smile at him, offering quiet reassurance, though my hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. There was a subtle tension in the air, one I couldn't quite name. A sense that something in my world had shifted overnight. But I told myself it was just nerves, that I was imagining shadows where none existed. The cabin appeared through the trees, secluded and rustic, its wooden facade blending with the forest around it. Snowy's small body stiffened, hackles raising, and then a sound tore from his throat, a furious, sharp barking unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. I froze in the driver's seat, heart suddenly pounding. "Snowy." "What is it, boy?" I murmured, my voice quivering. He leapt to the ground the moment I opened the car door, barking relentlessly. Something inside me tightened with fear and confusion. He never barked like this. Not even when strangers approached our home. Not even at storms that shook the windows. He knew something. I pushed open the cabin door, expecting the familiar smell of wood smoke and pine, the soft warmth of Richard's presence. But instead, my eyes fell on a scene that made my knees buckle. There he was, my husband, sitting closely with Emma, my younger sister, on the couch. Emma's blouse was slightly askew, a smirk playing on her lips. Richard froze, words failing him. "Brenda." "This isn't," he stammered, eyes wide, panic rising like a tide. But Emma's smirk only widened, cold and deliberate. "You were never enough for him anyway," she called, as if that one sentence could undo a lifetime of shared history, love, and trust. Snowy's barking reached a frantic crescendo, a mixture of warning and sorrow. He leapt between us, tiny body trembling yet defiant. I dropped the cake I had worked on with care, the icing smearing across the wooden floor in soft, sugary streaks. My hands shook uncontrollably, not just from shock, but from a grief that clawed its way up from deep within. I felt a tear escape, tracing a line down my cheek, and I suddenly realized how naive I had been, how blind to the cracks that had been forming in the foundation of our marriage. I turned silently, letting my feet carry me out of the cabin, out of the betrayal. I didn't need words. Emma's voice followed me, sharp, hurtful, intended to wound. You were never enough for him anyway. But the words were empty against the pounding of my own heart. Each step I took felt like a small act of reclaiming myself, even as the world I had trusted crumbled behind me. Snowy followed, his tiny paws silent against the gravel, his body pressed against mine as if to say, I'm here. You're not alone. We reached the car, and I slid inside, pulling the door closed with a hollow finality. Snowy leapt onto my lap, nuzzling my neck, offering warmth, loyalty, and love in a world that suddenly felt unbearably cold. I buried my face in his fur, inhaling the familiar scent, letting the tears fall freely. We'll be okay, boy. We'll find our way, I whispered, not fully believing it yet, but needing to say it aloud anyway. The drive back through the winding forest roads felt endless. Shadows from the trees stretched across the windshield like the looming uncertainty of what lay ahead. I thought about my life, the years spent building a marriage, a home, a shared existence with Richard, and the quiet disbelief that it had all been a carefully constructed illusion. Yet, in that moment, with Snowy beside me, I felt the stirrings of resolve. Betrayal was sharp, a knife at the heart, but it would not define me. I would not let it. Snowy's soft whine reminded me that love, in its purest form, could still anchor me, even as everything else fell apart. By the time we reached home, the sun was fully risen, spilling light over familiar streets and faces that remained oblivious to my personal devastation. I carried Snowy into the house, his little body warm against my chest. I set him down, his eyes looking up at me with unwavering trust. I knew I had to process, to grieve, and to begin to gather the pieces of my shattered life. But for now, I let myself simply feel, and let Snowy's quiet presence speak the words I could not. We will face this together. I closed the door behind me, the forest, the cabin, and the betrayal fading into the background, leaving only the soft, steady heartbeat of a small Maltese and the first fragile glimmers of a woman beginning to reclaim herself. I didn't yet know the path ahead, but I knew I would not walk it alone. The night had fallen like a heavy curtain when I returned home, the kind of darkness that feels almost tangible, pressing against the walls and settling into the corners of every room. Snowy, sensing my turmoil, followed close behind, his tiny paws patting softly on the hardwood floor. He curled at my feet as I sank into the armchair, my body trembling, a storm of grief and disbelief raging inside me. Tears streamed freely, unbidden, tracing silent paths down my cheeks. I had thought I knew betrayal, thought I had understood heartbreak, but nothing in my life had prepared me for this. The revelation that the man I loved, my husband, had been living a secret life with my own sister. And worse, it seemed that my late mother's legacy, a treasure of memory and love she had entrusted to me, had been ensnared in his deception. I barely noticed the hours slipping past. Snowy rested his head on my lap, warm and comforting, occasionally lifting his little nose to nuzzle my hand. I could feel his steady, reassuring presence, a small anchor in the chaos of my mind. The tears came and went in waves, leaving me raw and hollow, and yet in that emptiness, there was a quiet determination beginning to stir. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand and, driven by a restless need for clarity, made my way to Richard's office. The room smelled faintly of his cologne and old leather, the same scent that once brought comfort, now tainted by deception. The papers scattered across his desk drew my attention immediately. I picked them up gingerly, my hands shaking, not wanting to touch anything yet compelled to uncover the truth. Every sheet revealed another thread of manipulation, carefully calculated, meticulously hidden. Bank statements, account transfers, legal forms. I realized with a pit in my stomach that Richard had been controlling our joint finances with precision. siphoning funds, obscuring his actions behind layers of accounting jargon. Each number, each crossed line screamed betrayal, and I felt my heart lurch as I read further. Then the cruelest blow hit me. Buried among the financial records were notes, reminders, and communications between Richard and Emma. They had been together, quietly, methodically, for 2 years. 2 years of lies, of shared secrets that robbed me not only of love, but of my rightful inheritance. My mother's estate, the legacy she had entrusted to me, had been part of their plan, a prize to claim even before I could grieve properly. My hands trembled so violently that I nearly dropped the documents. The weight of it pressing down on my chest, suffocating, relentless. Snowy pawed at my knee, and I looked down at him, his wide, understanding eyes asking silently, "What now, Brenda?" At that moment, my phone rang, slicing through the oppressive silence like a knife. The screen displayed Richard's name. I hesitated, knowing the conversation would be fraught with manipulation, yet some deep, stubborn part of me answered. "Brenda," he said, his voice unnervingly calm, almost clinical. "We can split things fairly. Don't make this ugly. Be reasonable." His words felt like ice sliding down my spine. Reasonable! As if fairness could coexist with the deceit that had been poisoning our lives for years. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with rage and sorrow, and finally, I hung up. The room seemed even colder after the call. Snowy pressed closer, his small body vibrating slightly as he sensed my rising despair. I noticed a folder on the floor, partially hidden under a pile of papers. He pawed at it insistently, nudging it toward me as if urging me to look. I opened it with trembling hands, the paper crackling ominously. Inside were my mother's original will documents, crisp, authoritative, irrefutable. My heart sank to my stomach as realization dawned. Richard had forged paperwork. He had moved to claim her estate before probate could even clear, before the legal world had given me my rightful place as heir. I sank to the floor, Snowy immediately circling me protectively, whining softly, his tiny form offering a strange kind of solace amidst the storm. I ran my hands over the documents again and again, as if physically touching the proof could somehow alter the betrayal written in ink. My mind reeled with the enormity of it all years of careful planning. Lies and calculated cruelty aimed at robbing me of both love and inheritance. Every detail now bore the weight of deliberate malice, every forged signature a reminder of my husband's duplicity and Emma's complicity. Yet even as the wave of despair threatened to consume me, a small, stubborn ember of resolve flickered to life. I was no longer the woman who would silently endure humiliation and theft. Snowy rested his head on my lap, and I stroked his soft fur, feeling the warmth and loyalty that had never wavered, unlike the humans in my life. The betrayal was bitter, but it would not define me. I had proof, I had awareness, and for the first time since discovering their deceit, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope that I could take action, that justice, though delayed, might still be possible. The night stretched on, and I held the documents close, letting the quiet companionship of my little Maltese guide me through grief. Tears came again, but this time they were interspersed with breathless, determined whispers. I will not let this continue. I will honor my mother. I will protect what is mine, and I will rise. Snowy pawed gently at my hand, and I whispered back, "Yes, boy, we'll face it together. We'll find a way forward." For the first time that night, I allowed myself to imagine a path through the darkness, toward restitution, toward clarity, and toward the reclamation of my life. The community center smelled of polished wood, faint coffee, and the faint tong of cleaning supplies. It was a place I'd come to know over the years, a haven of routines, small conversations, and quiet acts of service. But today, it felt different. The familiar clatter of dishes from the cafeteria and the muted hum of chatter seemed distant, muted behind a fog of my own preoccupation. Snowy trotted beside me, tiny paws clicking against the linoleum, his ears perked, his eyes scanning every corner. He had been my constant companion through the past days of shock, grief, and betrayal, and his presence alone gave me a fragile sense of courage. As I set up my station for the volunteer work I loved, organizing donations and preparing small packages for the families in need, a woman approached. She was professional, yet carried an approachable warmth. Her eyes were sharp but kind, and there was an unmistakable confidence in her posture that suggested she was accustomed to authority. She introduced herself. "Detective Laura Chun, I'm investigating financial irregularities in this area. Do you have a moment to speak?" Something in my chest tightened. Meeting a law enforcement officer in this context felt both daunting and, oddly, like a lifeline. I nodded, swallowing hard, and gestured to the small corner table near the coffee station. Snowy, unusually calm, sat beside me, resting his head against my leg. Normally, he was cautious, wary of strangers, but something about Laura seemed to earn his trust instantly. I noticed it and allowed myself a fleeting, quiet smile. If my tiny companion felt safe with her, perhaps I could too. We sat, the hum of conversation around us fading into a soft background noise. Laura's gaze was steady, but not judgmental. She offered me a cup of coffee, steam curling in delicate wisps, and I accepted with trembling hands. "I can tell you're under a lot of stress," she said gently, her voice calm and measured. I nodded, unsure how to begin, how to encapsulate the storm inside me with words. It's my husband," I began, voice breaking, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid in my cup. I just discovered he's been manipulating our finances, planning things with my sister." I paused, unable to find words to express the full depth of my betrayal. "And he's trying to take my mother's inheritance, everything my mother left me. It's all been part of this plan." Laura listened silently, her expression one of focused empathy. There were no interruptions, no rushed reassurances, just an attentive presence that allowed me to spill the chaos of my emotions without fear. Snowy shifted slightly, leaning closer to me, and I felt a small, grounding comfort in his touch. My tears, once jagged and hot, began to take on a rhythm, a soft ebb and flow, as I recounted the details of Richard and Emma's deception. Finally, Laura leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing with professional concern. "Brenda, what you're describing, it sounds like embezzlement. Do you have documentation?" Her tone was calm, but beneath it, I sensed the weight of seriousness, the kind of acknowledgement that meant she truly grasped the gravity of my situation. I reached into my bag, hands still trembling, and pulled out the folder I had discovered at home, the one Snowy had pawed at insistently. I laid the documents on the table, spreading them out carefully. Bank statements, account transfers, the forged will, all pieces of the puzzle that had seemed impossible to decipher alone. I watched her eyes scan the papers, her expression shifting from concentration to hardened resolve. Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your husband made a serious mistake," she said finally, her voice low, carrying the weight of someone who understood both law and human betrayal. "Let me help you." The words hung in the air, simple yet monumental. It was the first time in days that I felt the grip of despair loosen, replaced by a spark of hope. Snowy wagged his tail slightly, sensing the change in my own body language, the first subtle sign that perhaps we were no longer completely adrift in this storm. I allowed myself a deep breath, letting the warmth of the coffee and the steadiness of Laura's presence anchor me for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I told her everything, each detail spilling forth like a river, finally breaking free of a dam. The fear, the humiliation, the grief, and the quiet rage all poured into the conversation. And through it, she did not flinch, did not dismiss my feelings, did not make excuses for Richard or Emma. She simply listened, guiding me gently to understand that my pain was valid and that action was possible. Snowy nudged my hand, as if reminding me that I was not alone. I rested my palm against his soft fur, feeling his heartbeat under my fingers, a small rhythm that mirrored the pulse of determination rising in me. Laura's presence, her careful words, and her unwavering attention gave me a profound realization. I had an ally, someone who could help me navigate the labyrinth of deceit, someone who could translate betrayal into evidence, heartbreak into action. By the time I left the community center, the sun had dipped low, casting long, golden streaks across the parking lot. Snowy trotted beside me, lively yet composed, and I felt a strange lightness amidst the lingering weight of sorrow. For the first time since that terrible discovery in the cabin, I sensed that a path forward existed, faint and uncertain, but tangible nonetheless. And it was a path I would walk with careful steps, supported by loyalty, love, and the unexpected ally who had entered our lives at precisely the right moment. I carried the documents close as we drove home, the world around me tinged with the promise of action, justice, and the reclaiming of what had been wrongfully taken. Snowy rested his head on my lap, and I whispered softly, "We're not alone, boy. We're not alone anymore." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. The phone rang late in the afternoon, piercing the quiet of my living room. Snowy, lying lazily on the rug, lifted his head at the sound, ears twitching. I answered hesitantly, my heart already tight with apprehension. On the other end was Emma, my sister, and I could hear her crying through the line, her voice trembling, fractured by fear. "Brenda, I'm in the hospital," she stammered, her words broken by sobs. Richard, he hit me. I don't know what to do." For a long moment I sat frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, my chest tightening in a mix of anger, disbelief, and a deep, instinctive worry that I couldn't ignore. The rational part of me, the part that had been seared by betrayal, whispered to stay away, to protect myself. But my heart, my stubborn, good-hearted nature, refused to let me turn away from someone in obvious fear and pain. "Emma, I'm coming," I said quietly, voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "I'll be there soon." Snowy leapt to my side as I grabbed my coat and keys. He growled softly when I approached him with the leash, as if sensing the tension in the air. Normally a gentle companion, he seemed wary, alert to a danger I could not yet see. The drive to the hospital was a blur. My mind replayed all the pain Richard and Emma had caused, the lies, the deceit, the way they had fractured my life. And yet, beneath it all, there was a flicker of maternal, sisterly instinct, a need to show compassion even in the face of betrayal. When we arrived, Snowy remained tense, his small body rigid as we walked through the sterile corridors. He growled again when I pushed open the door to Emma's room. My breath caught. Emma was lying in the hospital bed, her face marked by bruises, tender and swollen. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with tears, reflecting fear, guilt, and perhaps a dawning awareness of the damage that had been done. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in silence, the hum of machines and distant voices fading into the background. Emma's gaze met mine, and I saw a mixture of vulnerability and remorse. "Brenda," she whispered, voice low and fractured. "He's not who we thought. He used both of us." The words landed heavily, the weight of realization settling over us both. I knelt beside the bed, Snowy pressing against my legs protectively, his soft fur grounding me. My hands reached for hers, clasping them gently. "Emma, tell me everything," I urged, keeping my voice steady, despite the tumult of emotions roiling inside me. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, haltingly at first, then in a torrent of confession. Richard had another woman, she revealed, a wealthy widow named Jennifer, whom he had been courting behind both of our backs. He wanted her money, Brenda. "Everything was calculated," Emma murmured, her voice trembling. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, the realization of his relentless manipulation hitting me like a wave. Every smile, Every tender word, every gesture of supposed love had been a mask. Snowy shifted slightly, letting out a soft growl. Protective, yet anxious, as if sensing the truth and the danger that lingered even in this sterile, supposed safe room. I stroked his fur absent-mindedly, grounding myself, reminding myself to stay calm, to be the steady presence Emma needed. She continued, her voice small but gaining weight as she confessed, We were both just assets to liquidate. He never cared about either of us. Not really. Hearing the words, my chest tightened further, but there was a strange clarity in the honesty of her admission. Emma's remorse shone through the fear and bruises, a fragile but real acknowledgement of wrongdoing and complicity. "I'm sorry, Brenda," she whispered, voice breaking again. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop him." I held her hands tighter, allowing the tremor in her fingers to be a bridge between us, a human connection amid the wreckage of our lives. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence heavy with emotion, that allows grief, remorse, and tentative forgiveness to breathe. I could feel my own tears tracing slow paths down my cheeks, mingling sorrow with relief that she was safe, that she was finally acknowledging the truth. Snowy pressed against me, his small form vibrating softly, as if to say, "We will protect each other. We will survive this." I whispered softly, trying to soothe both of us, both Emma and myself. "It's not your fault, Emma. We've been manipulated, deceived by someone we trusted, but we're here now. We can face it, together." She nodded slowly, tears wetting her pillow, and I saw the first flicker of something like hope in her eyes, a tentative willingness to confront reality, to reclaim herself from the grip of fear and manipulation. Emma then shared more hesitantly about Jennifer, the other woman, and the elaborate lies Richard had spun. Each revelation was a new shard of pain, but it was also a step toward clarity, a dismantling of the illusion that had held us captive. I felt a strange surge of purpose, a determination to transform this chaos into action, to protect both of us from further harm. Snowy's gentle nudges and soft whines reminded me that I was not alone, that love and loyalty could exist even in the aftermath of betrayal. By the time I left the hospital, my arms ached from holding Emma's hands, from comforting her, but my heart felt lighter in a way I hadn't expected. Snowy trotted faithfully at my side, and for the first time, I sensed that the darkness was not all-consuming. There was a path forward, messy and uncertain, but real. Emma's admission, her remorse, and her fear were not just confessions, they were beginnings. Together we could navigate the aftermath, confront Richard, and reclaim the truth. That night, as I tucked Snowy into his little bed at home, I whispered softly to him, "We're not just surviving, boy. We're going to rise from this. We'll protect each other, and we'll find justice." He curled into my lap, a tiny heartbeat of warmth and unwavering loyalty, and I allowed myself to imagine a future where fear no longer dictated our lives. Emma's fear, her pain, our betrayal, none of it would define the rest of our story. And for the first time since the cabin, I felt a fragile but steadfast hope take root. The days that followed were a strange mix of fear, determination, and fragile hope. Laura became my anchor, her calm professionalism providing a structure to the chaos I had been navigating alone. Each morning, Snowy and I would prepare for what had become our new routine, gathering evidence, organizing documents, and retracing the threads of Richard's long history of deceit. It was exhausting work, but the very act of documenting, of proving the truth, gave me a sense of agency I hadn't felt since the cabin incident. Snowy, ever vigilant, seemed to understand the stakes. His small body would press against my legs as I went over bank statements, his head tilting in ways that reminded me that he, too, was part of this fight. Laura taught me how to catalog everything carefully. Copies of bank transfers, receipts, emails, and notes from witnesses. We recorded phone calls, carefully ensuring that each word Richard uttered was documented. At first, it felt intrusive, almost wrong, to turn our lives into a web of evidence. But as I realized the scope of his manipulations, it became clear. This was the only way to reclaim what had been stolen and to prevent him from hurting others. It was during one of our sessions that I discovered the depth of Richard's pattern. Old bank statements, folded into hidden corners of his office drawers, revealed transfers to accounts under different names, patterns of sudden wealth and unexplained spending. Names and addresses hinted at previous partners, women whose lives he had infiltrated, deceived, and abandoned. The realization left me both horrified and strangely galvanized. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was uncovering a trail of exploitation that demanded exposure. One afternoon, Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor and a longtime observer of our little community, called. "Brenda, I remember seeing him," she said, voice quiet but firm. "I've seen Richard with other women before when you were volunteering at the center. I remember thinking it odd, but I never said anything. I'm so sorry for not speaking up sooner." Her apology carried the weight of years of hesitation, but it also provided critical corroboration. I listened, taking careful notes, my heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and regret. Every small memory she shared, every detail she recalled, became a piece of the mosaic I was piecing together. Snowy and I took to the streets with a new purpose. Our routine walks became missions in disguise. As I pushed his little stroller through the neighborhood and along busy streets, I carried my camera and notebook, documenting Richard's meetings with Jennifer at upscale restaurants and cafes. Snowy, ever alert, would tilt his head toward the windows of the establishments we passed, sensing tension or unusual behavior. His companionship made the task bearable. Without him, the work would have felt unbearably lonely. Every photograph, every note, every shadowed observation felt like a small victory, a tangible step toward reclaiming control over my life. Emma, surprisingly, became a reluctant ally. After days of reflection, guilt, and tears, she agreed to testify against Richard in exchange for reduced charges related to her complicity. It was a delicate conversation, fraught with emotion. "I don't want to hurt you, Brenda," she said, voice trembling, eyes downcast. "But I can help stop him from doing this to anyone else." I held her hands, squeezing gently, feeling the subtle tremor of sincerity. "We'll do this together," I whispered. "We'll make him accountable." Her nod was slight, hesitant, yet it carried the weight of commitment, a fragile but meaningful alliance forged in the fires of betrayal. Then came the call I had dreaded but had begun to anticipate. Richard's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the room. "You're just a bitter old woman, Brenda. No one will believe you," he sneered, the words designed to intimidate, to diminish. I felt a flicker of old fear, a shadow of the woman I had been, the one who had tolerated his manipulation for decades. But something inside me shifted, hardened, and ignited. The fear, the hesitation, the endless acquiescence all dissolved in that moment. I was no longer the doormat he had married, no longer the silent observer of his cruelty. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, but with a new, purposeful energy. I looked down at Snowy, his soft eyes meeting mine, unwavering in loyalty. "We're doing this, boy," I whispered, voice resolute. "We're going to show the world who he really is." Each step forward became infused with a sense of justice and empowerment I had never imagined I could feel. The grief, the betrayal, the long nights of tears, they all became fuel, refining my focus, sharpening my determination. Laura's calm guidance continued to provide structure, and slowly, methodically, we compiled an overwhelming body of evidence. Witness statements, photographs, recordings, and documents, all pieces that together created an undeniable narrative of deceit and manipulation. With every page I filed, with every recorded conversation I listened to, I felt a subtle but growing catharsis release of the fear and helplessness that had consumed me. Even as exhaustion weighed on my body, a sense of clarity emerged. I was no longer reacting blindly to betrayal. I was acting with purpose, with intelligence, and with the unwavering support of those who cared, including Snowy, Laura, and even Emma. The path ahead remained challenging, fraught with uncertainty, but I could feel the tides beginning to turn. I was reclaiming my life, reclaiming my dignity, and reclaiming the legacy my mother had entrusted to me. That night, as I prepared for bed, Snowy curling at my feet, I allowed myself a quiet, proud thought. I was no longer the same woman who had quietly endured, who had let fear and manipulation define her life. I was determined, vigilant, and fiercely protective of my truth. Something inside me had snapped, not in anger, but in liberation. And with Snowy's gentle warmth beside me, I felt the first real, unshakable taste of empowerment. The quiet promise that we were about to confront the man who had tried to destroy us and finally bring justice into the light. The morning air was crisp as I stepped into the small office of the forensic accountant I had hired. Papers and ledgers were spread across the desk like a battlefield, each number a potential clue, each signature a fragment of truth. Snowy, unusually alert, sat beside me, his small body tense but steadfast, as if he understood that the stakes of this battle were far higher than any he had known before. I had always believed in order, in clarity. But seeing the trail of manipulation Richard had left in our finances made my heart ache with a mix of sorrow and righteous anger. The accountant, a meticulous man named Mr. Hamilton, began tracing transactions with precise, deliberate movements. He clicked through spreadsheets, highlighted suspicious transfers, and muttered under his breath as patterns emerged. My eyes widened as he finally spoke. "Brenda, I've traced over $340,000 of your mother's funds," he said, voice steady but not without a hint of sympathy. "They've been diverted into accounts that are indirectly controlled by your husband. He's been clever, but it's all documented. There's no way around this." I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me, followed immediately by a surge of resolve. That money wasn't just numbers on a page. It was my mother's legacy, her love, her trust in me. Every dollar stolen was an attempt to erase years of care, devotion, and family history. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles whitening, as Snowy pressed his small head against my arm, grounding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton," I whispered, voice trembling but firm. "We're going to make this right." But the legal storm was already gathering. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Richard had filed for divorce first, claiming I had abandoned him. The audacity of it left me momentarily breathless. He was trying to rewrite history, to paint himself as the victim while erasing the years of manipulation and betrayal. I felt a flicker of panic, but it was fleeting. Snowy nuzzled my hand, and I remembered all the careful evidence we had gathered, the documents, the recordings, the witness statements. I was prepared, and I would not let him define our story. The preliminary hearing arrived, and the courthouse loomed like a fortress of judgment and anxiety. Richard entered first, exuding confidence, a smile carefully constructed to mask the web of lies he had spun. His lawyer followed, papers in hand, ready to assault my credibility with every tool at their disposal. My own heart raced, but I drew a deep breath and focused on the facts, on the quiet certainty that the truth was on my side. As the proceedings began, his lawyer attempted the expected, painting me as unstable, paranoid, untrustworthy. "Your Honor," he said, voice clipped and rehearsed, "my client is being harassed by baseless accusations. The plaintiff's claims are erratic, inconsistent, and indicative of emotional instability." I felt a pang of frustration, a mix of anger and sadness, but I held my composure. Each accusation, each insinuation, was a reminder of how carefully Richard had constructed this facade of normalcy, while secretly undermining my life. When the judge asked about the separate bank accounts, Richard's expression remained unflinching. He spoke smoothly, lying with the ease of someone who had long practiced deception. My stomach twisted, but I looked up at Laura in the gallery. She met my eyes with a small, knowing nod, and it was enough. The nod was reassurance, a silent promise that the work we had done, the evidence we had meticulously compiled, was enough to counter the lies. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease just a fraction, and allowed myself to feel the growing clarity and focus that had become my armor. Then came the moment that tested my resolve further. Richard's lawyer approached me, placing settlement papers on the desk with a perfunctory smile. "Sign these, Mrs. Wilson," he said, voice polite but cold. "It will save everyone time. This is the fair way forward." The papers were designed to look reasonable, but every line was a trap, a subtle attempt to strip me of agency, to erase my rights and my mother's legacy. My hands hovered over the documents, and for a moment, I felt the familiar surge of fear and doubt. Could I withstand the pressure? Could I navigate this labyrinth without faltering? Then I felt it, a spark of something stronger than fear. Something deep, resolute, unyielding. Snowy brushed against my leg, his presence a reminder of loyalty, love, and the innocence that had been corrupted by Richard's deceit. I looked around the courtroom, the judge observing patiently, the lawyers poised, Laura standing quietly in support, and I realized that for the first time in years, I was no longer passive. I would not be silenced. I would not be intimidated. I would not allow a lifetime of trust and love to be overshadowed by lies and manipulation. I glanced at Richard, whose confident mask began to falter ever so slightly, and a quiet fury settled in my chest. I no longer needed to argue, to prove, to beg for recognition. The evidence was mine, meticulously gathered, undeniable, and it would speak for me. I pushed the papers away from me, a subtle but deliberate gesture, signaling that I would not be coerced, that I would navigate this path on my own terms, with justice as my guide. Later that evening, as I returned home, Snowy leaping joyfully around my feet, I allowed myself a deep, liberating breath. The tension of the day ebbed slowly, replaced by a cautious but tangible hope. I realized that this counterattack, this meticulous, deliberate reclaiming of my life and my mother's legacy, was more than legal maneuvering. It was a reclaiming of myself. Each step I took, each document filed, each piece of evidence secured, was a small act of empowerment, a rejection of the fear and manipulation that had dominated my life. As I settled into my chair, Snowy curling beside me, I whispered softly, almost to myself, "We're no longer hiding, boy. We're taking back what's ours, and we're doing it together." His little body pressed against mine, a heartbeat of unwavering loyalty, and I allowed myself to finally feel a quiet, profound sense of strength. The path ahead remained challenging, yes, but for the first time, I believed that justice was not just a possibility. It was inevitable, and I was ready. The morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, but I barely noticed it. My mind was elsewhere, focused, tense, alive with purpose. Laura had orchestrated the next step in our plan a sting operation, designed to catch Richard in the act, exposing the full scope of his manipulation and fraud. The thought of confronting him in a controlled, deliberate way stirred a mixture of fear and anticipation within me, a storm of emotions that my careful composure barely contained. Snowy, sensing my heightened tension, stayed close, rubbing against my legs in quiet solidarity, his little presence both comforting and grounding. Laura explained the plan in careful, precise detail. An undercover officer would pose as a corrupt financial advisor, someone Richard would be eager to manipulate. It was risky, yes, but necessary. Each detail was discussed, rehearsed, anticipated. I felt my chest tighten as I listened, This was no longer a passive collection of evidence. This was confrontation, a calculated maneuver to bring a man who had hidden behind lies and charm into the open. Snowy whimpered softly, as if aware of the gravity, and I bent down to scratch behind his ears. "We've got this, boy," I whispered. "We're ready for him." The day of the sting, I watched from a safe distance as Richard walked into the carefully staged office. He was confident, smug, believing he was in control, that his charm and cunning would outmaneuver anyone who questioned him. I clenched my hands, nails biting into my palms, as I imagined the arrogance he carried, the same arrogance that had caused me and Emma so much pain. Then the conversation began. Through the recording devices, I could hear him casually discuss previous wives, their finances, how he handled their assets, weaving his lies into a seamless narrative that betrayed not only greed, but callousness. Every word was a testament to his manipulative nature, a revelation of the depth of his deceit. My stomach churned with a combination of disgust and vindication. This was the proof I needed, the undeniable evidence of his lifelong pattern of exploitation. While I listened, my phone buzzed. Jennifer. My heart raced as I answered, knowing that her call could bring more clarity or more chaos. Her voice came through, trembling with anger and disbelief. "Brenda, he proposed to me last week, while still married to you. I can't believe I didn't see it sooner." Her words were jagged, raw with emotion, and I felt a surge of empathy and connection with this woman who had, unknowingly, been caught in the same web Richard had spun around so many others. "Jennifer, I know," I replied softly, keeping my voice calm. "He's done this before. We're exposing him together. Can you help us?" Her voice shook again, but this time with resolve. "Yes. I want him stopped, Brenda. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." I felt a small, powerful spark of hope. This wasn't just about reclaiming my life anymore. It was about protecting others from the same pain, about transforming betrayal into action and justice. Later that evening, a summons arrived, an invitation I had been expecting yet dreaded in equal measure. Richard had arranged a dinner, ostensibly a reconciliation with Emma. He wanted me to witness his victory, to see him in triumph, flaunting what he thought was his regained control. The thought of sitting in the same room as him, of being so close to the man who had caused so much pain, sent tremors through me. Yet, I steeled myself. I was no longer the woman who had suffered in silence. Snowy and I arrived, the lights of the restaurant glowing warmly, deceptively inviting, masking the tension that charged the air. Richard's eyes lit up when he saw me, an expression that should have meant triumph, satisfaction, control, but I met it with calm, a sweet, measured smile that concealed every pang of anger and betrayal. He approached, confident, oblivious to the sting that had been meticulously set in motion. "I hope you've enjoyed these last few weeks of freedom, Richard," I said, voice soft but clear, every syllable deliberate. My smile was sweet, almost maternal in its ease, but beneath it lay the weight of everything I'd endured, the meticulous planning, the evidence compiled, the strength I had quietly built. His brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features, but he masked it quickly, eager to maintain his illusion of control. As the evening progressed, the sting operation unfolded seamlessly. Richard continued to speak freely, thinking himself clever, unaware that every word, every boast was being recorded, catalogued, and preserved for the moment when the truth would be revealed in full. I sat across from him, Snowy by my side, feeling a strange blend of triumph and tenderness, triumph for the justice that was in motion, tenderness for myself, for the strength I had discovered within. Jennifer's involvement added another layer of clarity, a tangible ally who, like me, had been wronged and was now poised to take part in exposing the deceit that had spanned years. Her fury, raw and honest, fueled the effort, transforming shared pain into a unified mission of justice. The sting was more than a trap. It was a reclamation of agency, of dignity, of the right to protect oneself and others from calculated manipulation. By the end of the evening, Richard believed he had orchestrated his perfect performance. He left, oblivious to the net that had been cast so carefully around him, unaware that each boastful recounting of past manipulations, had been captured for the world to see. I exhaled slowly, feeling Snowy press against my side, his warmth a quiet celebration of the victory, small yet significant. On the drive home, I reflected on the irony, the beauty, and the bittersweet relief of the night. I had stared Richard in the face, remained composed, and yet delivered a quiet, unspoken assertion of power. He believed he was triumphant. I knew the truth. The sting operation had worked perfectly, and for the first time in years. I felt the weight of fear lifting from my chest, replaced by something far more enduring. Justice in motion, and the quiet, unwavering strength of a woman who had learned to rise from betrayal with dignity, cunning, and heart. The courthouse felt colder than usual that morning, a sterile air circulating through marble halls that had witnessed countless battles of ego and justice. I clutched Snowy in my arms as we walked into the courtroom, his small heart beating rapidly against my chest, echoing my own tension. The smell of polished wood and worn leather, the rustle of papers, and the murmurs of other spectators formed a backdrop that seemed both distant and oppressive. My stomach knotted, yet beneath the fear, a steady flame of determination burned. This was the culmination of months of pain, betrayal, and meticulous preparation. Every document, every photograph, every recorded conversation I had gathered was about to confront Richard's lies head-on. He entered first, the same arrogant, confident air he always carried, as though the world owed him compliance. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture flawless, yet I already saw the cracks beneath the surface. Perhaps it was the weight of the months he had underestimated me, the careful way I had turned evidence into an unshakable narrative. I took a deep breath, setting Snowy down gently at my feet, his small tail wagging in anticipation. I could feel his presence steadying me, a heartbeat of warmth in the midst of dread. Then Laura entered the courtroom. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from a complex mixture of relief and resolve. Richard's confident expression faltered almost imperceptibly when he saw her, his eyes narrowing slightly, like a predator sensing the trap closing. His lawyer immediately stood, objecting in sharp tones, "Your Honor, this witness," but the judge's firm hand cut him off. "Proceed. The witness may testify." Laura's presence alone was a statement, calm, precise, composed, and yet imbued with an intensity that spoke volumes about the truth she carried. As Laura presented the evidence, I felt a swell of vindication. First, the recorded conversation from the sting operation, every word Richard had spoken about previous wives, their assets, and his manipulations. Each boast, each casual acknowledgement of deceit, played out like a slow, deliberate unraveling of his carefully constructed image. Then came the forged documents, meticulously laid out, exposing his attempts to manipulate my mother's inheritance and my own finances. Finally, she introduced testimony from 3 previous victims, women whose lives had been quietly disrupted, controlled, and exploited. Their voices, calm yet resolute, spoke of betrayal, fear, and the subtle terror of being deceived by someone you thought you loved. I felt a lump in my throat as I listened, recognizing in their pain echoes of my own, yet tempered by the strength I had gathered over months of planning and courage. I glanced at Richard across the courtroom. His face, once smooth and composed, now drained of color. There was a flicker of panic in his eyes, the first crack in his armor, as if he realized for the first time that the lies, charm, and manipulation that had served him so well could not withstand truth laid bare. I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge of the deep human frailty behind his arrogance. He was not invincible. He was merely a man exposed. The next witness entered, Jennifer. My chest tightened as she approached the stand, her presence commanding in a way that radiated both fury and dignity. When she spoke, her voice clear yet tinged with disbelief and righteous anger, I felt the courtroom shift. He proposed to me 2 weeks ago, Your Honor. Promised me his divorce was amicable. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I nodded, silently thanking her for courageously stepping into this confrontation. Each word she spoke dismantled the facade Richard had so carefully constructed. Then Emma took the stand. Her voice was softer, tinged with shame and sorrow, yet resolute. He manipulated our finances, my sister's inheritance, and he hurt me. He used me, Brenda, as a pawn, just as he tried to use you. She recounted the bruises, the threats, the lies, small, harrowing details that painted a picture of a life distorted by control and deceit. Listening to her, my heart ached, not for Richard, but for the stolen innocence, for the lives quietly undermined by his actions. Yet I also felt a profound sense of relief. She was facing the truth, owning it, and helping to ensure that justice could be served. Then, as expected, Richard's voice cut through the courtroom, loud, angry, desperate. "This is a setup. These women are conspiring against me." His scream echoed, a mixture of panic, disbelief, and rage. But the conviction in the courtroom did not waver. The judge, firm and unwavering, called for order, and federal marshals entered to maintain calm. Their presence underscored the seriousness of the proceedings, the weight of the truth finally confronting decades of deceit. I sat quietly, Snowy nestled against my lap, his warmth grounding me as the trial unfolded. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from fear, but from the raw, emotional release of months of planning, suffering, and perseverance. This was catharsis, the kind that arrives not in a single moment of triumph, but in the layered, intricate weaving of truth, courage, and accountability. I allowed myself to exhale slowly, feeling the tension of years of betrayal begin to dissolve. When the judge signaled for the evidence to be reviewed and Richard's reactions noted, I realized that something profound had shifted, not just in the courtroom, but in me. I had transformed grief and anger into focused, deliberate action. I had gathered allies, created a meticulous record of truth, and had, quietly, yet powerfully, reclaimed my agency. The emotional weight of the past months pressed against me, but it was tempered by empowerment, a deep understanding that even in the face of manipulation and betrayal, one can rise with dignity and strength. I looked at Laura, her face calm but her eyes filled with a quiet pride, and then at Jennifer and Emma. Each of us had been wronged, each of us had felt powerless, and yet here we were, united by truth, by courage, and by the unshakable commitment to justice. Snowy let out a small, satisfied bark, as if echoing the sentiment in his own canine way. I whispered softly to him, "We've done it, boy. We've finally done it." And in that moment, amidst the tension, fear, and exposure, I felt a profound sense of hope. The kind that comes when the trap you've set with patience and care finally springs, and justice, at last, begins to unfold. The morning Richard was taken into custody, the air in the courthouse felt charged, thick with a tension I had carried for months. Snowy sat on my lap, his small body trembling not from fear, but from the awareness of the moment's gravity. As the federal marshals approached him, handcuffs glinting, I felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. Vindication for the justice that had finally been served, sorrow for the years of manipulation, deceit, and pain that had allowed him to operate unchecked. I watched as he was led away, his face a mask of shock, disbelief, and something that looked very much like fear. For the first time, Richard had no control, no charm to mask the consequences of his actions. The courtroom seemed to exhale as the judge declared the final judgments. I was awarded full restitution plus damages, over $500,000. The number on the paper didn't fully capture the depth of relief, the sense of reclamation, or the validation of my mother's legacy that it represented. It was more than money. It was the affirmation of truth, of integrity, of resilience. Tears streamed down my face as I held the award documents in my hands. Snowy barked once, softly, almost as if celebrating in his own way, pressing against my leg as though to say, "We did it. We survived. We won." In the weeks that followed, the process of healing began to take shape. Emma entered a rehabilitation program and started therapy. Watching her struggle, falter, and gradually open up was difficult, but it also offered a fragile glimmer of hope. I visited her regularly during supervised visits, holding her hand across the table, feeling the subtle tension in her fingers slowly soften. "I'm so sorry, Brenda. You deserved a better sister," she whispered one afternoon, her voice barely audible, trembling with remorse. I looked into her eyes, seeing the genuine pain and regret, and for the first time in years, felt the possibility of reconciliation. "I know, Emma," I said softly, squeezing her hands. "We'll figure this out, slowly, but together." Meanwhile, Jennifer reached out to me, initially hesitant, her voice wavering with anger and disbelief, gradually softening with understanding. Over cups of coffee and quiet afternoons spent talking, we began to form an unlikely friendship. We shared stories of betrayal, strategies for coping, and the raw vulnerability that comes from being manipulated and used by someone you trusted. Together, we founded a support group for financial abuse survivors. Each session was a blend of tears and triumph, stories of devastation and resilience, a community born from pain but blossoming into hope. The work was exhausting, yet profoundly fulfilling. Jennifer and I, once victims, had become guides for others navigating similar dark waters. Mrs. Patterson and other neighbors also became pillars of support, offering meals, small gestures of kindness, and a constant presence that reminded me I was not alone. The small, tender axe lasagna dropped off at the door, a bouquet of flowers left anonymously, a simple note of encouragement were balm for the bruised soul. Evidence of the power of community and human empathy. Their love and unwavering support made the months of fear and isolation easier to bear, reminding me that even after betrayal, there is goodness in the world that can be nurtured and shared. One afternoon, a small ceremony was held at the local police station. Snowy, ever unaware of the symbolic weight of these events, wagged his tail furiously as a uniformed officer handed him a small certificate. "Hero Dog," it read, official and stamped, acknowledging his role in alerting me to Richard's betrayal and preventing years of further abuse. I knelt beside him, tears streaming, and whispered, "You saved me, Snowy. You saved my life." He barked softly, nuzzling against my shoulder, his small presence carrying the enormity of loyalty, love, and courage that had carried me through the darkest days. I began to understand, in subtle but profound ways, that justice was not merely a legal construct. It was the reclaiming of dignity, of life, of the right to exist without fear, manipulation, or control. Each restitution check, each therapy session, each shared story at the support group was a thread weaving back together the fabric of my life. I realized that strength was not the absence of vulnerability, but the ability to embrace it, to face pain, and to transform it into something meaningful and enduring. Even as life began to settle into a fragile rhythm, I noticed the quiet changes within myself. I laughed more freely, spoke more firmly, and allowed myself to feel joy again without guilt or suspicion. Emma, slowly, began to trust me again, to share her thoughts, her fears, her tentative steps toward growth. Jennifer became a sister in spirit, an ally forged through adversity and a shared commitment to prevent others from falling prey to the same deception. Snowy, my small but fierce guardian, became a symbol of resilience, his presence a daily reminder that courage often comes in quiet, loyal forms. As I sat one evening on the porch, Snowy resting against my feet, I felt the first real sense of peace in years. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I had faced deception, manipulation, and cruelty, and emerged with clarity, purpose, and the capacity to help others do the same. Justice had been served, yes. But the true victory was the reclamation of my own life, the knowledge that I could heal, rebuild, and live fully, with courage, compassion, and hope as my guides. 6 months had passed since the courtroom drama, yet the memory of that terrible cabin discovery lingered in my mind like a shadow I could never completely erase. Yet, unlike before, the shadow no longer frightened me. It reminded me of how far I had come. Mom's inheritance, once a point of conflict and betrayal, had been transformed into something beautiful and enduring. A nonprofit dedicated to helping elder abuse victims reclaim their dignity, their independence, and their peace of mind. Every file opened, every call answered, every hesitant smile from a grateful client reminded me that pain, when met with courage, could be transformed into hope and purpose. Emma had emerged from her rehabilitation program with a newfound clarity. Our relationship, once fraught with resentment and betrayal, had slowly begun to mend. She now volunteered at the nonprofit, her presence tentative at first, but growing stronger each day. I watched her work with clients, offering empathy and understanding in ways that I once had offered her. She had changed, genuinely, profoundly, and I found myself feeling a cautious hope, mixed with pride, as I observed her interactions. "I'm proud of you, Emma," I said one morning as we organized intake forms side by side. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that spoke of remorse, growth, and quiet determination. "Thanks, Brenda. I want to make things right. For everyone, and for you." Snowy, ever my loyal companion, had grown comfortable with this new rhythm of life, but I could see he needed a friend. One crisp morning, I adopted a second rescue dog, a small, spirited terrier named Coco. The two of them circled each other with cautious curiosity at first, sniffing, circling, tails wagging, and then, slowly, settled into a harmonious companionship that mirrored my own journey. Snowy's protective energy softened in the presence of Coco, and together they became my steadfast guardians. Companions who reminded me that life could be joyful, tender, and full of simple pleasures even after betrayal. Richard's sentencing came like a final punctuation to a long, dark chapter of my life. 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and assault. Hearing the sentence read aloud, a deep, complicated wave of relief and quiet vindication washed over me. There was still pain echoes of years lost, memories of betrayal, but it was tempered by the knowledge that justice had been served. I could finally breathe, not in triumphal glee, but in a quiet, stabilizing awareness that the past could no longer control my future. On the anniversary of that dreadful cabin discovery, I drove the winding forest roads, Snowy perched loyally beside me. The familiar sense of pine and damp earth reminded me of the moment when my world had fractured, when betrayal had cut deep into the life I thought I knew. But this time, I wasn't carrying cake for someone unworthy. This time, I carried flowers for my mother, an offering of love, remembrance, and respect. As I knelt at her grave, arranging the blooms with gentle hands, I whispered softly, "I protected your legacy, Mom, and I finally protected myself." Snowy barked once, tail wagging, as if agreeing, his little presence a warm, living affirmation of loyalty and resilience. The breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the quiet promise of renewal. In that stillness, I realized that strength was not about never falling. It was about rising again and again, seeking justice, reclaiming dignity, and helping others navigate the shadows that had once ensnared you. I felt the weight of the past months lift slightly, replaced by a profound sense of clarity and purpose. My phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. Another woman somewhere needed help escaping financial abuse. Her call, though unseen and unknown to me, was a reminder that the work was far from over. I smiled, scratching behind Snowy's ears as he nuzzled me, and felt a surge of determination. There were others out there, trapped in fear and deception, waiting for someone to guide them to safety, and I would. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, Snowy settling beside me, Coco now trotting at my side as we drove back toward town. Every mile felt like a reclamation, a continuation of the journey I had begun months ago in that small cabin. The world felt vast, uncertain, and yet full of possibility, and I knew that while Richard's chapter had closed, the story of resilience, courage, and compassion was still being written by me, by Snowy, by Coco, by every person who dared to rise above betrayal and fight for justice. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long golden rays across the road, I felt the quiet joy of new beginnings. Life, fragile and unpredictable, could still be beautiful. And as I drove forward, I carried not only the lessons of survival and strength, but also the commitment to use my voice, my experience, and my heart to protect and uplift others. Snowy barked again, excited and loyal, and I knew that together we would face whatever came next, with courage, love, and unwavering resolve. If you've been inspired by this journey and want to follow more stories of courage, resilience, and justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Join us in celebrating those who rise, who fight, and who help others find their strength too.